We are very fortunate and privileged to have with us today a panel of experts coming from holding a variety of roles in the technology and also the communications sector, and now pushing the boundaries in space innovation. Just to quickly introduce again, to my left we have Mr. Christian Patouraux, CEO and co-founder of Kacific. And then we have Mr. Zheng, CEO and co-founder of SpaceChain. And Mr. Alexander Jeuck, ICT and Space Tech International. Thank you for joining us today. So let's just kick off. The topic of the discussion today is Journey into New Space and Open and Secure Communication for All. So I thought I'll just kick off with a first question looking at the application of space technologies in communications, and then we'll look at the openness and the security piece. So we hear at the conference over the last day and a half about applications of space technologies, and as recently as this morning in also smart cities. Specifically in communications, I think what the advantage that stood out for me is that space technologies has the advantage of overcoming some of the physical constraints or problems posed by the more traditional land-based communications infrastructure. So, for example, Norway is launching a satellite to bring broadband to the Arctic, and that demonstrates the cost element of laying broadband hardware and cables on ground versus using a satellite. Some Chinese government agency is launching satellite to transmit quantum keys in executing the next generation of security protocol, the quantum security. So that demonstrates the stability of transmitting security codes in air through space, rather than, say, through the more traditional fiber optic. So my question to the panelists is, what other applications are there in communications, and what advantage or benefits do they offer compared to the more traditional communication infrastructure?
We operate very much in the broadband space, so it's very much in line with what you said, bringing broadband to the Arctic and preventing or avoiding the deployment of fiber. We do the same in the region here for remote archipelagos, remote clinics, remote hospitals, etc. Other type of applications, I guess, is a connection of connected devices, IoTs, that can be done. We don't really do that. We're very much focused on broadband.
For us, so we're SpaceChain. We focus on integrating blockchain in space.
So what is an example of a new market that blockchain in space is opening up?
Now we're at a stage that we want to leverage the satellite platform to bring more security for the industry. So for many of you, even probably heard this crypto exchange or wallet get hacked and for 50 million, 100 million dollars. But for us, we're leveraging the satellite platform, which is the remoteness, the global coverage, and also the security that we can bring in more secure infrastructure for the wallet company, for the whole blockchain industry.
My next question to Christian, looking at in terms of complementing or supplementing the traditional communications, when you launch, say, for example, a project to bring broadband to the communities in the remote region, what are the aspects of making sure that the project is giving the intended benefits in terms of cost, affordability, and also availability, robustness, reliability?
One thing there are three things that you have to look at when you connect a remote community. One is price, of course. It's willingness to pay. How much are people willing to pay today? My answer to that is in the order of, well, I would say maximum $2 per gigabyte. The holy grail, I would say, today would be $1 per gigabyte. We are almost there at wholesale level, but then you have to add distributor margins and taxes and everything. So $2 per gigabyte, I think the remote users could pay for that, either at enterprise level or user level. And the second part is what is the quality of service? You can give them that price, but then actually what's the speed? Can they actually use the service? I like to say that there is no internet for the rich and internet for the poor. There's only one internet. There's only one Skype, one YouTube, one Facebook. There is either you give the bandwidth that people need to use those services, or they just won't use it. So the walled garden internet, where you'd have only Facebook and a few other applications, or Google and a few other applications, that just doesn't work, because that implies a low grade of service, a few kilobits per second per user. You need to give them a quality of service that you have in cities, in the developed world, in order for them to use it. Otherwise, your project will fail. The third aspect is access. And, you don't have the two other elements without access. You cannot, and, that is one of my big questions for the LEO constellations, is how are you going to give access? How do people in remote villages that the LEO constellation pretend to really connect are going to access that bandwidth? With today, do you need to track those satellites? There is today only phased array systems or tracking system on the ground that cost $30,000. That is not access. Access is connecting a village for, say, $500. Right? So that is the target. So those 3 points is willingness to pay, level of service, and level of access. To that, I would also add that you need to look at whether by providing internet in those communities, you actually provide value. The value, there's different grades of value. There is the kind of frivolous value, if you want, of posting pictures on Facebook, watching YouTube at night or whatever. So is that value? Yes, there are people willing to pay for that. Is that fundamental enough? Maybe not, for people to spend a pretty significant amount of their willingness to pay into that service. Then you have a more important, I would say, layer, which is connecting education, connecting post offices, connecting businesses. This is important. It's not frivolous. People are willing to pay for that because it will create economic development, better welfare, livelihood. And then you have the fundamental layer that has to do with safety and security. So that is connecting hospitals, because we, as in the last 3 years, when we have rented capacity from satellite, waiting for our new satellite to come online, which will happen last week, we have released capacity in the Pacific, and we actually realized that we were saving lives. So that's addressing the fundamental needs of connecting clinics, connecting police stations also, providing security to citizens, and then providing emergency response connectivity as well. So this is fundamental. And as you go from the most frivolous to the more fundamental, there is a higher willingness to pay and a deeper entrenchment of your service.
Alex, do you agree with Christian's target numbers?
Yeah, there's ambitious targets, but that's what is expected in the market. And we have seen over the last years more and more a race for having more bits per hertz. And this is a change in how the business is done. I remember very well, around 20 years ago, I made a presentation in APSCC introducing a system we were building for NBC at that time. We saved them 6 transponders and tripled the traffic. And then the satellite operators asked me, Alexander, you are at the right conference. You are at the satellite operators conference and you're talking about saving capacity. But nowadays it's all about getting more efficient, getting better in usage of frequency to compete with the expectation in the market, what people are willing to pay. And on the government level, that is a different story. They are premium customers. They are having bigger pockets, but they also having different demands. What Christian was starting here is a very ambitious project and vision. Yeah, I wish him all the best for that. And I think if you see it from a community aspect, you have to develop community. And we have to make sure that we also tell the people that satellite or space has a role to play to bridge the digital divide.
So what is a more realistic objective or goal to aim for?
More realistic. I think the more ambitious, the better. However, you have to see what is happening in the industry. We had this massive changes, let's say, on the baseband. It's still going on, but smaller steps. But now the satellites. We are talking about high throughput satellites. We are talking about ultra high throughput satellites. If you see the Viasat satellites coming in, the satellites, 3 satellites, they're having more than all the capacity of all these other geo satellites in space. This is a game changer. Then we have the LEO constellations coming in from various players. Let's see how many will survive. But some of these players, they have not the intention, I believe, to make money with the connectivity. Connectivity is commodity. They want to have a service on that. They want to have the end users. They want to have the data. They want to sell services. Where's the place for the traditional telecom the satellite operators? Let's see. Even my former company, SAS, I worked for, they sometimes say, oh, we are not a satellite company anymore. We are a telecom company. They are the biggest satellite operator. So they try to find their places. They want to go more in services. Maybe see more mergers again happening to get the leverage. We have the 5G, 3GPP initiatives. A lot of changes going on.
Yeah, I think the term telecommunications will probably evolve as the technologies that's available, expands. In terms of combining blockchain with space, what is the advantage compared to other blockchain sort of innovators out there who are not using the space element?
Yeah, so for us, we actually are experiencing very similar thinking process. If we look at the whole blockchain adoption, maybe there are 20 million people that have ever get in touch with the blockchain technology directly. So if we only capture, let's say, 1 to 2% of the market, it's actually very, very small volume. So we're targeting at the enterprise clients, and we try to figure out what's the biggest threats for them and what's kind of biggest demand for them. Then we are looking at most for crypto exchanges or wallet company who is are already guarding $1 billion worth of cryptocurrency, but most of the assets from the customer deposit. However, most of the insurance company couldn't really insure that because many of them haven't really get to the stage that identify what is this asset, what is this you guys are trading. So that becomes really interesting. So think of a company that's holding $1 billion worth of assets, and it's not insured, so it becomes a very big risk. So that's why they want to bring up the security level as much as they can. The industry is already hiring the best cybersecurity expert within blockchain itself, but it's still, you see hacking happens all the time. How a lot of the technical infrastructure our clients are building, they're all still it's all terrestrial. And they share some kind of a server. They're probably using AWS. They're probably using other people's network service. And all those kind of components become a potential breach point for the hackers. But for us, we're building the private network through our satellite payloads and having direct communication. Some of the clients even ask us to try to build their mini ground station to directly receive the signal from us. So it's really about being the blockchain expert in space industry and being the space expert in blockchain industry.
So now we come to the security piece then. So a question for Christian really is, earlier we talked about space in our common social engagement. We immediately think that is away from Earth and therefore more difficult to be hacked. What is space industry for communications? So for some people, it's just what is out there in the space, but for others, it could be also the communication uplink and downlink between space and ground assets, and also including ground assets. So that's, the definition will probably have to be more aligned.
Yeah, I guess there are different elements into the whole value chain that you build with space. There is the asset in space, the control system that controls the asset in space, the asset on the ground that belongs to the company or the operator, so that would generally called the gateways, the teleport, and all the networking system that are associated to that, and the control system that control these system. And then you have the traffic, the actual communication traffic that start from the data center, flows through all your system, flows through the satellite and lands at the end user. And I think the two systems should be really separated. So the traffic itself, the service, is by definition open based, it's based on traffic generated by end users, either from end user to end users or going to the cloud and prone to attacks. Then you have the control system for the ground, the control system for space. And those are, I guess, the control system for the ground is more difficult to attack, but probably exposed as well because it communicates to ground systems. And then you have the control system for space that is extremely difficult to attack. You need to set up, because those systems are typically off-grid. You need a separate system really to attack that, and separate hardware visible. That needs enormous resource, and I don't think that in history that has happened.
That part I actually agree, because I think for cybersecurity is not only the technical aspects, but also there's this game theory of putting the stake so high that it becomes not so much value added for the attacker.
A bit like security by obscurity.
It's so basically, the resource you're gonna spend so much resource on just figuring it out, then the potential value you get out of it could actually be lower than what you spend. So I think that part is really important, because from a technical perspective, there's no so-called unhackable system, because no matter what human builds it, and there's definitely ways potentially, but if you have enough resources. But at the same time, we need to put the stake so high and so difficult, then for those people are kind of not able to actually make attempts.
Alex?
Yeah. Okay, I would like to split it down on the extending what Christian was saying. We have the traffic. This is the user traffic. There are certain protocols, ComSec protocols, how to protect it, to encrypt it. Traditional ways. Maybe in future we have QKD systems who can enhance that. But it goes further. We have then the transmission sec. This is trying to make sure that your transmission channel is in principle more secure. There had been also tremendous efforts by the VSAT industry mainly to making that hub systems more secure in general. And then we come to the telemetry, managing satellites, and this is usually a high secure system. However, 2007 or 2008, US media reporting that one Landsat satellite was compromised on the telemetry, and another satellite as well in the same time frame. I believe during that time there was not that much fake news out, so there must be a certain reason. And I know in the meantime that there is a lot of effort on making sure that the telemetry data is kept safe, and that's also where we have to have separate networks then. And now thinking further, this is a geo satellite, but how do the orchestration of thousands of satellites, this cannot be done by people themselves. You need to do machine learning, you need to do artificial intelligence. That's a completely different flavor. How secure is that? We will see. I think it's a game on the edge. We have on top the challenges with interference. During the Arab Spring, we had in the Middle East a lot of interference. The one very well published is the one.
Jamming, you mean jamming?
Jamming, yeah, but there are also other things possible, but that is then more on the, let's say, on the governmental side. There's always a dark side of the... I was building secure networks. I was doing that over the last 30 years, but you are building it because there are other people who are trying to break in.
Christian, you also mentioned earlier about a denial of service attack that happened once, quite a few years ago. Yes. So are you worried that it's going to happen again, or is it something that concerns you?
Yeah, of course, it's always concerning. We have taken steps in order to protect our network. So really the traffic part of the whole system I described earlier. We've delegated that to a company that specializes in that, because you need substantial economies of scale and resources in order to do this. So we prefer not to take that in-house. But yes, it happened to us at very early stage in a leased satellite network that we put in place, waiting for Kacific 1 satellite to be built and launched. So that 3 years ago we started this. We tested it for a day or so, and immediately we got a flood of attacks and denial of service that basically flooded the transponder we had enabled. and no traffic could go through. So we built the firewall behind that, and I think we've been fending about 1 million attacks per day on our firewall since then. But it was interesting to see. We were not really live with commercial traffic, but to see that what happens when you actually open the floodgates and actually it happens instantly. It's really interesting.
So, Chi, for blockchain and space, have you seen any incidents or examples where there was an attempted stealing of keys in order to get access to the cryptocurrency?
Yes, for sure. So for the terrestrial network, for the kind of common blockchain, it definitely happens on daily basis, and millions of attacks are very common. So it's unfortunately, like, we are also experiencing some this kind of attempts. But our solution is that we want to not create a single point of failure, but actually we want to leverage blockchain. Blockchain we have is that we have multiple ledger or multiple database that have the similar copies. So we call it nodes. Basically, when you have let's say 11 nodes, then unless they can hack 6 of them, then your whole system is not compromised. So that becomes much more difficult than if you have only one database. But then we want to add another layer, basically launch let's say this 11 nodes with different jurisdiction. So some from like Japan, UK, US, some are owned by Singapore. So we all use a different control system. It uses different ground station network. So if you think of that if you need to hack 6 out of 11 nodes, then you need to at least break into 3 different kinds of control systems. That kind of put the resource also like potentially being spent on this much higher. So that's also the part we want to leverage, is that we want to do the decentralized satellite constellation with our partners. That instead of one company launch the whole constellation, we have multiple company to launch constellation together. But for the data sharing and the networks, all be managed by open protocol that built by groups. So that's kind of.
So you're saying that space combined with blockchain is less vulnerable to denial of service attacks?
So I would say that you need to decide which side you want on. So like if you leverage a lot of with blockchain, they actually sacrifice a part of efficiency, because you need to have multiple copies of the database, or you need to have potentially the transmission will not be as fast, but it's more secure because you are creating repetitiveness and of the database. So for us, we're serving high value enterprise companies that they probably want to make those 10 million, 20 million, 50 million transactions once every 2 days. So the efficiency is not such a huge problem. Actually, lower efficiency is actually better for them, because once they get hacked, they want the transaction happens slower. And there's an incident actually a couple months ago. There's hacker hacking to this wallet company, and they transferred $50 million, spending $0.2 of transaction fee. And it's gone, so it's an anonymous transaction.
I would like to come more on the physical layer, where we see the weakness of any system, be it terrestrial or satellite. It's often the human users who are making mistakes. There was a few years ago on Visa terminals. They also have an admin passport, and if people don't change it, that's the first problem. The next thing is the impact of wrong installation can compromise the network very badly. Misalignment of the antenna, unshielded connectivity, this creates problems which can force operator to switch from one transponder to the other. We having more and more tools from company looking into monitoring system in systems where you can identify intruders, but what do you do then? There's no enforcement usually in the civil world. In the military, it's a different story. Maybe somebody sends a helicopter. It goes to that extent because the military is using different frequency bands. They having their own frequency bands, and usually if there is an interference, you have to expect it is intentionally. And the commercial side, there is also intentional interference, but most often it's unintentional interference, and the group of satellite operators usually works very well together in mitigating that, because they need to get access of data which is also on the neighboring satellites to identify where is the problem coming from, and We will see how this is now also mitigated in high throughput satellites or satellites with multiple beams. It's getting a little bit more complex.
So are you saying that for commercial operators, security is perhaps not as important as for government operators?
No, it has the same importance for them. However, there's a different process how to act if there's a compromise, yeah? But I think the whole telecom industry is not that much afraid that someone is hacking the data which is transported. But what happens if a network gets out of control? That's your main reliability. The end-to-end data traffic encryption, this is usually a user's responsibility, I would say. If you offer that as a special service, all fine, but there anyhow, this is a complete industry doing encryption devices and this and that. The problem is that usually for people like me, as a private person, I think the worst that can happen is that someone is hacking an operator of my mobile and getting my credit card data. If he gets access to my WhatsApp messages, okay, maybe not good, but my private life goes on.
Unless there are photos that is...
Yeah. Actually, I want to add another point of this, is that, a very similar situation for us is that we think the technology itself doesn't fail us, but it's all the human factors. We had an incident of one of our partner company. The founder take a selfie himself but reveal, oh, it's like, what a nice view of my house or something. Then people social engineered it, basically figured out his address from the Windows view, then finding out like what Wi-Fi he used, what kind of like in this building use, it's not even his own thing, and then that's the starting point of the breach after the research. So it becomes a little, if you think about it, it's actually pretty scary. Is that you never know what kind of information you shared that actually become a lead for the hacking. So that's another human factor plays into it.
Yeah, but for example, okay, now we talk about hacking on IP level and so on, but we should have any illusion. There was no secure fax transmission in the past. There are companies specialized in these days to make sure that they can receive the faxes going here and there. Yeah, so there's always a second side. Intelligence, they have usually the better people, I have to say. Yeah, they have the bigger pockets. But again, it depends what do you have to protect. Is this user data? Is this some strategic communication between a nuclear power plant and some power grid? Different levels of security can be overcome with different kind of systems.
Question for Christian. So earlier you are saying that the space assets is quite separated or off-grid compared to, say, the ground assets. So when we talk about, say, security, then for the ground assets aspect of the overall space technology industry, what are your insights or your views about the risk mitigation that's needed for the ground assets of the space industry? You say that there are not any difference for other industries, or there's some special consideration that we need to put in for the space industry?
No, I think it's similar to other industries that have ground assets. If you run a power plant, for instance, or a water distribution system, you are exposed if someone can hack into your system. The way we operate our system is, we control our network from Singapore. We have gateway systems in Australia, Indonesia, and Philippines that are run through leased lines. So those are separate systems that are difficult to hack. It's not impossible, but again, you need probably a physical device to get there. You can't just attack it from the cloud. Now, can you somehow get a virus into these systems? Is there an advantage for doing that? Maybe a competitor trying to gain an advantage, but I don't think there is. A bit like Zheng was saying, is that what resources are you going to throw at it for what return, really? You have to look at that trade-off. So it's just an industrial system, really, that's essentially off-grid that you will need to hack. Now, on the user side, you do have thousands of small devices A bit like mobile phones. In the satellite system, you have terminals, what's called terminals, so modems, antennas and things like this. So those, I believe, are vulnerable as well. They can be hacked because they carry a traffic. So, and by default, they can be accessed remotely. So those can be hacked, and if you manage to send a signal for all these systems, because those systems are upgraded, their software is upgraded via the satellite itself. So if you can send a signal for all those systems to upgrade their software, and actually you just send a corrupt file or something like that, you can stop thousands of terminals potentially. Yeah, that could be a potential breach, but I believe that, again, this is a bit remote from an operator like us. We buy these systems from world-class operators, like in our case it's ST Engineering from Singapore, that take care of making sure that these things don't happen.
If anything goes wrong, you go back to them.
This is a potential angle if you want. Yeah.
Question for Alex then. In terms of the regulations to promote openness and security in space communications, what are the additional considerations that industry partners or governments have to, take into account?
The challenge is that the space and frequency is coordinated by ITU. These are guidelines, and ITU or United Nations, there's no, let's say, law enforcement. So if you read through the rules, they also a little bit weak. We will see now especially how LEO and GEO can coexist, because GEO has a priority over LEO. LEO maybe need to switch off when they come close to the beams coming down from the GEOs. But coordination and cooperation between the industry is the most important. And I would say, from my experience, that industry, the satellite operators, even they are hard competitors, but when it comes to making sure that they coordinate usually their efforts, they try as an industry to avoid having that outages which should not be there. That's all I can say. There is nobody even saying, okay, you have to do this, you should do.
Any questions from the audience?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to congratulate Kacific for a successful launch. Now, about the secured satellite communication, what is your thought regarding security due to the mother nature, which is rain degradations in this very area? So what is your perception regarding the SLE or the service level agreement, which is mostly required by corporate entities to be the user of such kind of services?
Right. That's a good question. Thank you. Of course, the higher you go in frequency, the more you are susceptible to rain, and there are mitigation factors that have been put in systems today. They didn't exist 15 years ago. You have adaptive coding modulation, for instance, that helps that. In a system where we differ with other systems that are more focused on trunking, trunking is by default affected by rain a lot more because all your bandwidth come in one location. When that location goes off, you have thousands of people that start screaming at your call center. For a system like ours, we have a built-in site diversity inside the system because you have thousands of tiny terminals that are disseminated across your coverage. What happens there is that in general, you have 85% of them that are under full clear sky. Then you have about 10% of them that are under, overcast skies, so that makes up 95%. Then you have another 4-point-something% of them that are under light rain, where the system will still work, but a little bit degraded. And then you have a few that are under fairly extreme rain. So you have a mix of that. Now, those systems that are under clear sky, they have excess margin substantial excess margin in the system. And what the beauty of the adaptive coding modulation and the intelligence of the hubs today, what they do is that they take this excess margin and they allocate it to those 10% that are under rain, and they further allocate it to the last 4-point-something% that are under heavy rain, if you want. And then the last one, okay, there's maybe a few that are under severe rain that may not have the signal. So in overall, what you have is actually a system that is extremely stable in bandwidth. It's very resilient in bandwidth. And we're actually testing it today. Our satellite Kacific one came online last week, so we started testing. We've started observing its behavior under rain. And we've had a terminal just last week in Samoa that was under rain. It maintained 70 megabit per second throughout the rain all the time. Now, it's true the efficiency dropped, but the system just poured bandwidth at it, poured megahertz at it, so that it kept its signal. And so that's the inherent site diversity of a full HTS direct-to-home system, as opposed to a trunking HTS that, you know, others operators have that have actually been affected by rain. I think that our system will achieve north of 99.7, 99.8% availability.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you for the question. I'm afraid that we don't have any time left. So thank you very much, our panelists, for a very interesting discussion. I'm sure all of us have a lot more questions. I myself have a lot more questions. So let's put our hands together for our panelists.